In 1804, inside Notre Dame Cathedral, a man born a nobody on a small Mediterranean island picked up a crown and placed it on his own head. He did this right in front of the Pope, who had traveled to Paris specifically for the job because he refused to let anyone else do it. He didn't believe power was given. He believed it was taken. Look at this chart. This is the positive side of Napoleon Bonaparte's ledger. He won 38 major battles and lost only 5. He controlled more of Europe than anyone since the Roman Empire and sold the Louisiana Territory for $15 million, doubling America's size. But right next to it, we plot the human cost, a massive rising bar showing 3 to 6 million dead. He devastated an entire continent, only to die alone on a remote island, exiled by the very nations he tried to conquer. Both of those extremes are entirely true. The same man who built modern civil law also left Europe in rubble. This tension between the supreme builder and the catastrophic destroyer is what defines Napoleon. Napoleone di Bonaparte was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica. He was technically French, but he spoke with a heavy Corsican accent his entire life and was mocked for it at French military schools. His family was minor Italian nobility, respectable but not wealthy. When his father died of stomach cancer, Napoleon was 16. He immediately took on the burden of sending his military salary home to his mother. Then, in 1789, the French Revolution exploded. The old aristocratic order was dismantled. King Louis XVI was executed. In the violent chaos that followed, a rare window opened. Suddenly, military promotion wasn't restricted to royal bloodlines. It was based on talent. In 1793, at the Siege of Toulon, the 24-year-old artillery officer got his chance. The British had occupied the key French port. Napoleon positioned his cannons to force the British fleet out of the harbor. The plan worked perfectly. Toulon was retaken, and Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general overnight. The violent upheaval of the revolution was the exact crucible required. Without it, an impoverished outsider with a heavy accent would never have been allowed to become a nationally recognized military prodigy. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the French Army of Italy, a ragged, underfed force. Yet, moving faster than any army was expected to move, he defeated the Austrian Empire in less than a year. He struck before the enemy could organize and exploited every gap in their lines. 2 years later, he invaded Egypt. Militarily, it was a failure. The British destroyed his fleet, and Napoleon abandoned his own stranded troops to return to France. But while there, his army made a significant scientific discovery. They unearthed this block of granodiorite, the Rosetta Stone, which eventually provided the key to deciphering ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. When he returned to Paris in November 1799, the government was collapsing under debt and corruption. He executed a coup, dissolved the government, and installed himself as first consul. At 30 years old, he controlled France. Here, he proved he was highly capable as a civilian administrator. He immediately centralized the French government, created the Bank of France, reformed the educational system, and built extensive road networks. In 1804, he introduced his most enduring legacy. This document is the original edition of the Napoleonic Code. It replaced a chaotic patchwork of centuries-old feudal customs with a comprehensive civil legal framework. It established secular equality before the law and guaranteed property rights. By the age of 35, he had successfully leveraged his ruthless military fame to rewrite the civil and legal foundations of his country. That same year, following a rigged public referendum, he declared himself emperor. Looking at the cavernous interior of Notre Dame Cathedral, you can picture the scale of the coronation ceremony, and right in the middle of it, Pope Pius VII was forced to simply sit and watch as Napoleon crowned himself. This map of the 1805 Battle of Austerlitz shows why he felt invincible. He deliberately weakened his right flank, the red bloc shrinking here, to lure the combined Austrian and Russian armies into attacking. Once they committed, he launched an overwhelming thrust right through their exposed center, defeating 2 emperors in a single afternoon. By 1807, his empire stretched from Spain to Poland. But he had a fatal flaw. He couldn't conquer Britain. So he tried to strangle the British economy using a continent-wide blockade called the Continental System. As the borders close on this map, you can see the problem. Enforcing it required every European power to comply. The more he forced them, the more resentment built against France. The cracks started showing in Spain. In 1808, Napoleon arrogantly placed his own brother on the Spanish throne. The Spanish people launched a brutal guerrilla war that dragged on for 6 years. It tied down hundreds of thousands of French troops, draining resources. Napoleon later called it his Spanish ulcer. The ambition that built his empire was now suffocating it. He was forced to fight endless wars just to ensure his allies kept following his rules. Then came Russia. In June 1812, Napoleon invaded with 500,000 men, the largest army ever assembled in Europe. But the Russians refused to give him the decisive battle he needed. They just kept retreating, burning their own land behind them, pulling the French deeper into Russian territory and stretching their supply lines past the breaking point. When winter closed in, Napoleon had no choice but to retreat from a burned-out Moscow. Look at this driving snow. Temperatures dropped to 30 degrees below zero. Men froze in their tracks. Of the roughly 500,000 soldiers who crossed into Russia, fewer than 100,000 made it out alive. The disaster triggered a rapid collapse. In October 1813, a coalition of nations defeated him at the Battle of Leipzig. Paris fell shortly after. By April 1814, Napoleon abdicated and was exiled to the small island of Elba. He lasted less than a year. In a period known as the 100 Days, he escaped Elba, landed in France, and marched back into Paris without firing a single shot, as royalist troops mutinied to join him. But the European coalition immediately reformed. On June 18, 1815, at Waterloo, his army collapsed against the combined British and Prussian forces. His entire reign relied on total, uncompromising military victory. Against a fully unified Europe, that strategy was completely unsustainable, making his final fall inevitable. This time, the British made sure he wouldn't come back. They sent him to St. Helena. You can see the stark, sheer cliffs of the island rising out of the vast South Atlantic Ocean, over 1,000 miles from the nearest continent. He spent his final years there complaining about the humidity, obsessively playing solitaire, and eventually dying at age 51. 19 years later, his remains were returned to France with massive ceremony. Today, he rests beneath the imposing, gilded golden dome of Les Invalides in Paris, visited by roughly 2 million people every year. So how do we balance the ledger? On one side, we have real, lasting achievements. The educational institutions he built still operate. The administrative reforms modernized the French state. And the legal code he authored still forms the basis of civil law in over 40 countries today. But right alongside that, you have millions of dead soldiers and civilians, an entire continent left in rubble. You have press freedom abolished and slavery reinstated in French colonies. You have a man who rose to power in a revolution against hereditary monarchs, only to build a hereditary empire of his own. He once said, "I am the French Revolution." The ultimate paradox is that the dictator who crushed the Republic likely did more to spread democratic legal principles and civic equality across the world than any figure of his era. That is Napoleon Bonaparte, a legacy that refuses to resolve neatly. Thanks for listening. Follow the show so you don't miss what's coming next. The Vikings. We're skipping the Hollywood myths about horned helmets to look at the real history. Farmers and traders who built expansive empires reaching from North America all the way to Baghdad. We'll see you there.